All right, thank you for staying. You're watching Daybreak reach you live from the nation's capital in Abuja, right here on Trust Television. Now, going into our discussion of the day, an imminent industrial action is underway as airport workers give the federal government a 2 weeks deadline to meet their demand over an anti-labor clause stipulated in the recently amended aviation bill. The union said that the federal government should pull down the unfavorable clauses, stating that the amended bill gives the Minister of Aviation absolute power over the unions. In their argument, the union were of the opinion that the stipulated clause goes against international labor laws and also poses an encroachment on the duties and jurisdiction of the Minister of Labor. We'll be talking about this, and we have in the studio a strategist and policy analyst. He is Yusuf Baba. And then hopefully we'll have also the General Secretary, Air Transport Services, Senior Staff Association of Nigeria, join us later in person of Francis Akinjole. He'll hopefully join us later as we discuss further. Thank you so much for joining us on Daybreak this morning.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so before we begin our discussion, we'll take a short clip, of what exactly is going on.
World Press Conference here in the airport in Lagos. And this was predicated upon what we heard and even saw that they were planning to do, as in to enact law that will outlaw trade union activism and activities in Nigerian airports. Right from 1977, when they introduced this Essential Services, Trade Dispute Essential Services Act into our life by decree, and which they later turned into act. You know the style, the type of regime we were operating then, the military regime. They are coercive in nature. And now, they are now deeming it necessary to import this and foist on us as aviation workers.
The aviation workers are being denied their rights and privileges to engage in unionism. From the act that was being submitted through the National Assembly to the presidency, we have, been inundated that the act has been smuggled into, some clauses, some obnoxious clauses, which we denied the unions in aviation industry to perform their rights as enshrined in the Trade Union Act.
All right, so good enough. We have Comrade Francis Akinjole now joining us virtually. He's the General Secretary, Air Transport Services Senior Staff Association of Nigeria. If you can hear me, Francis, good morning. Thank you for joining us on Daybreak. All right, so while we try to sort that out, Yusuf, thank you so much for joining again. Well, this is the situation that we are in. We have already an existing crisis with the aviation fuel, the rising cost, the inflation generally, the scarcity of dollar rocking the aviation sector. And now added to that, we now have this, threat of a strike by, aviation workers and all of that. What are the projections for the aviation sector as it stands?
To be honest, to my mind, in my opinion, this is highly unnecessary. I don't know how we came about this, but like you rightly mentioned, we have enough crisis in a critical sector, as it were, and to have this very key industrial crisis is one too many. I don't know how strategic that or the import of the inclusion of these provisions that trigger this crisis, or how it happened, because I hear words about smuggling or boggled. We understand and we know the process of legislation is clear. Engagement of stakeholders, robust debates and conversations before the legislation emerges and is passed, if indeed it was smuggled, or if indeed it was passed without the knowledge of some critical stakeholders like the unions, which I don't think it is. Whatever it is, I don't think is strategic at this point in time for the sector, and I don't think is the way to go.
So it's said that aviation workers are now essential workers, basically, by that law. Aren't they aren't they qualified, or I would say, aren't they to be essential workers?
You see, we are trying to hold on to like 5 melons with 2 arms, Ayuba. The Medical Association of Nigeria are threatening to go on strike. The Nurses Association of Nigeria are threatening to go on strike. ASU is on strike. Are they not essential workers? Let us define what essential workers are. And I think in fairness to the unionists, we are living in an era of democracy. And the labor unionism is actually to differentiate between slavery and free trade and freedom. In the case of aviation, I think you should know one of the most unionized entities or industries in the world is aviation. And you can go back and check how countries have been engaging aviation unionists and how they have almost crippled economies in Europe, in Americas, and everywhere else. So I think it should have been a well thought out consideration. Designation of aviation workers as essential workers is normal, it's standard. Yes, aviation workers are essential workers, just like journalists are essential workers.
Well, the aviation workers, one of their statements said that during the public hearing,
yes,
that when the issue came up, that they drew the attention of the lawmakers to a judgment by the industrial court, which stated clearly that aviation workers were not essential workers. But that put aside, they came out last Thursday to say that they didn't like the section 67, subsection 1 to 3. They didn't like that, and they called it obnoxious. However, some persons are saying that, okay, you spoke about it last Thursday. Was it enough time to now protest on Monday? Couldn't there have been some form of engagement with stakeholders before that protest?
Well, I am not a union member, and I'm sure when you see, water boiling, there's a process before the water gets to boil. I don't know what must have transpired behind the scene, and I don't know what the union members must have heard or been told for them to take this action. And indeed, we know unionists can also be very proactive. I think they are trying to assert themselves, and I think they want to be heard, and I think they want to force the hands of authorities into a conversation with regards to these provisions, so that discussions can take place. And like I said, giving the tag of essential workers, to my mind, speaking from a generalist perspective, it doesn't take away the importance of the unionist. Of course, maybe from the legislative perspective or from a legal perspective. Indeed, it's a critical sector, and indeed it is highly required.
Exactly, because I'm trying to wrap my head around the fact that being an essential worker, does it mean that you do not have rights to belong to associations, which is a right provided by the Constitution in the first place? I mean, we have doctors, aren't they essential workers? Yet they embark on strikes, isn't it? So what the intent now is the issue as regards the aviation workers. What exactly is possibly the intent, of having this?
Well, I wouldn't know. I can just hazard a guess. From my standard point of view, is maybe to try to minimize disruptions, quote and unquote, of activities or operations in the sector, and also maybe to reduce or whittle down the influence of unionism, within the strategic and operational framework of the sector, maybe to ensure as much as possible high availability of service if and when needed, or at all time. The question is that really possible, with this kind of situation, like you mentioned, when you come this way?
When I thought about it, like you said, being an essential worker, we have essential workers in Nigeria that go on strike. Doctors,
absolutely,
essential workers.
So earlier,
however, when you look at the new Civil Aviation Act, 67, after describing them as essential workers, subsection 1 goes further to say that it therefore means that the minister can at any point say no unionism. So could that be why? Maybe that provision, that particular one, maybe if that act had stopped at calling them essential workers, without that provision, do you think that maybe that could have saved the situation?
Stella, you hit the nail on the head. That in itself, to my mind, if I was on the side of the Honorable Minister, whom I regard so high, have a lot of respect for, I would have whispered to him to say, this is a red herring, because first of all, it also runs counter to the rule. We have a Minister of Labor and Productivity, and indeed we have the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Who is the person that can say no unionism? What are the process for us to promulgate unionism, for example? Is it with a whiff of a pen of a minister of a particular sector, for example? So I think that provision, I don't know the intent, but I think that provision came out wrongly, and it doesn't sit well within the provision of that act as a stakeholder. Now I'm speaking as a stakeholder of the sector, and I don't think it is something that should be allowed. We should review that position in the interest of peace, in the interest of industrial harmony. Don't forget, the sector has consolidated unions. Different unions that take care of some various silos of these critical service providers. And there is no way you can take them head on and you expect the efficiency of a sector that should be better than what we have today to happen. This has to be reviewed, to my mind.
In any case, is there any benefits, of having these unions, in the aviation sector, other than, because, what we all know, or what Nigerians mostly know about unions is when it comes to issue of strike, or when it comes to issue of protesting for, the benefits of workers and the rest. Are there other benefits of having unions?
Ayuba, I will just try to correct a bit remove a word of salaries, but to use the word of welfare. I think the unions are fighting for the welfare and the well-being of their colleagues in whatever industry it is, whether aviation, whatever, is to ensure that the paymasters or the employers, are fair, in addressing the welfare issues of the staff. And to that extent, if that is the case, they are very relevant. We talk about the principle of collective bargaining. We talk about not just salaries, the welfare, general well-being, Medicare, life after work, and all those provisions. And I think the whole idea, even if we go back to the history of labor unions, is to apply that counter pressure to the employer to ensure there's a balance between the employer and the employee in terms of the service and the service provider and the person that is ensuring the service is being provided. So to my mind, it's all about engagement all the time, having worked in that industry as well, to know it's all about engagement. And the moment you start bringing in these provisions, it presupposes that there's ill will or there's ill intent with regards to how the staff, now quote and unquote, not just unions. The unions is assumed as speaking on behalf of the staff. And then there's a plan, and that's where you have notions about there's going to be mass sack, there's going to be regeneration and all those kind of things. That may or may not be the case. And I think in the principle of transparency and fairness, it is rather to engage properly, discuss the issues, get to a middle ground, and let us move on. It's a highly critical sector. We don't need disruptions at this point in time.
But generally speaking, are there instances where you could say the unions are a bit overreaching when it comes to just going for a strike? Take, for instance, what happened at Kano Airport. On that particular day, yes, there was going to be this protest by the airport workers. But then at the Kano Airport, there was a dispute between FAN, Federal Airport Authority, and the Nigeria Airspace Management Agency. Yes. And the dispute was because they cut off electricity supply to the accommodation of the Nigeria Airspace Management, the staff of that place. And because of that, the air traffic operators decided to shut down work. And so nobody could move out of the airport. Would you say that was enough? Because the reason that was given for cutting the electricity supply was due to non-payment of the electricity, though.
Okay. Now, that is a different conversation from this issue of legislation. That is what I consider an internal issue that was not handled properly, with due respect to the CEOs of the NAMA and FAN. Okay, FAN provides service to NAMA. But how do we end up with this situation where you have members of the same family? NAMA and FAN all belongs to the aviation sector, are not able to sort out this issue, are not able to find a way and manner to deal with this issue. Yes, at the end of the day, if NAMA is not responsive, FAN has to take action, I agree. But you sit down and look at the far-reaching consequences. Like you said, they cut off the power supply to their accommodation and all that. And what they are saying is, if that impacts on our welfare, we don't care what is happening at the top, but you can't just wake up and there's no light. So I think in this particular case, is a function of two elephants that we're fighting, and the grass is suffering. In this case, it's a thorn, not just an ordinary grass. So to that extent, the union are crying out and saying, you cannot cut off the light of our colleagues to live in darkness just because the authorities, now in this case, you employers should sort out yourselves and leave us alone, so to speak, and are reaching out on behalf of their colleagues. And you talk about being overactive or overreactive. You see, the history of labor unionism has always been on the platform of being aggressive, of being assertive, you know, with regards to the demands or the needs or the yearnings or aspirations of their colleagues. That is how they operate, okay? And from experience also, sometimes early proactive reach out and engagement curtails this kind of situation. I give you an instance. There was a time I was working in an organization where, in the aviation sector, where it was practically clear that the entire staff will down tools. And it means aircrafts will not, let's say 65% of the aircrafts will not be handled for the next day. And you know what that means to the aviation sector, both international and domestic flights. And it's a critical welfare issue that had to be addressed. We had to make sure, late into the early hours of that morning, that that issue is addressed or was addressed to avoid that very thorny situation. Because when that happens, on the face of it, first of all, is not good. The impact on Nigeria, the impact on the economy, the socio-economic impact of the economy and the polity is not good. So the top lines, my advice to the top lines is constructive engagements and listening to what I call the early warning systems. From experience, the labor unions have a way of reaching out, of voicing out early enough. They don't operate clandestinely, okay? Because within the framework of unionism, also there is this provision that ensures that they must reach out, they must speak out, they must give timelines before they take actions. And then sometimes also you can look at it from their own tactics of ensuring they are heard.
Would you say that the activities of unions, you know, sort of sometimes hinder the smooth running of airline operations? That is, when it comes to employer and an employee kind of relationship and all of that, and perhaps maybe if there could be a correlation between the airline operators and the legislators to find a way to, you know, maybe silence that aspect of that relationship.
You are being very generous with your words, Ayuba. It's not sometimes, it's all the time. From air traffic controllers to pilots to crew members to ground handling operators, the entire aviation value chain are unionized. And these guys, there's every critical point, someone that has to do something for us to have a successful operation. So it's not even sometimes, it's all the time. Engagement of the stakeholders is very important. Sensing and influencing is very critical, because that will help in many cases avoid this kind of either embarrassing situations or even potential disaster.
All right. So let's join our guests virtually. Francis Akinjole, the General Secretary, Air Transport Services Senior Staff Association of Nigeria, for his own perspectives. Thank you so much, Francis, for joining us from Daybreak. Yes, so if you can hear me, just go ahead and tell us what exactly the reasons behind this, beyond what we have read from the papers and the rest of them, being a member of a general secretary of one of the unions there?
Of labor industry. So what are we saying? Are we not planting? Because we don't have evidence in the waiting aviation industry. What we are doing, it is better for us to allow for contrary opinion. They cannot claim monopoly in every matter that affects the interest of workers.
All right, Mr. Akinjole. All right, Mr. Akinjole, if you can hear me. The aviation workers, is it just the fact that they have been named part of people that offer essential services, or the second part of that provision, 67 subsection 2, that gives the minister certain powers? Is that the problem the workers are having? If, for instance, that section was not in that act, would the workers be okay by just calling them essential workers, but not giving the minister those powers over unionism and all of that?
I want to believe that you understand the implication of what essential services mean to the people that brought. Every Nigerian understands. It is not today that we are hearing that police, military, whatever are essential services providers. And what's the implication? They cannot protest. And the reason, we have to read this thing communally. And the reason why they have now granted the power of regulating the unions in the aviation industry to the Minister of Education is because they don't want us to talk. As a matter of fact, the power to even prohibit the unions in the aviation industry is just to the Minister of Aviation. So what are we saying? We are not fighting this in isolation. We are not protesting against it in isolation. If you say we must not do this, everything is already provided for in the Labor Act. So why are they now duplicating? Is it not going to be a double jeopardy? We are being regulated by the Minister of Labor, who are the experts in affairs of labor unions, and we are now attempting to grant those powers to the Minister of Aviation, who is a specialist in his own field as well. Is it not precarious for us as
All right,
unions?
Akinjole, you are making a demand and you are giving an ultimatum of 2 weeks to the federal government and the National Assembly to review this bill. I mean, the lawmakers are just barely returning from a recess. How practical is it that this bill will be revisited within these 2 weeks and then that part of the bill is expunged?
Well, I will not sit here to see them how they organize themselves for the purpose of doing their job. They knew what they have done. A bill that is inimical to the interest of workers and by extension, interest of the nation was presented before the president for his assent. The president has assented to 2, and we have now raised our voice. Whatever magic they may do to make this happen is left to them. We will not stop doing what we are meant to do for the protection of the interests of our members. They can cut short of their vacation. This is a subject of national interest. If they didn't see it, they said we are essential service provider.
But you know, there's a lot of questions around.
Situation.
There's a lot of questions around how this part of the bill was even assented to by the president. I mean, weren't there public hearings? I mean, if there was, how then did this part of the bill scale through?
Okay, that is what we should also see as a mysterious intention from some quarters. We were all at the public hearing where we deliberated diligently upon the bills, the proposed bills then. It was in only the civil aviation that the president of one of the unions raised the issue of services. And the lawmakers were advised that there is a subsisting judgment by National Industrial Court delivered by Justice E.N. Ajakova in February 2014, where aero contractors was not considered as essential services providers. And because said that they are not providing any essential services, any different from Ekene Dilichukwu or any other transport company. So where have they now brought in their own essential service coloration? And this law has not been reversed. I mean, this judgment has not been reversed. And even, what is the definition of essential services? We all know what essential services is. And in our trade disputes at essential services Act, it was clearly stated those that are referred to as essential services.
So
airlines are not.
So are you objecting to this provision because aviation workers are not essential service providers, or because it will deny you the opportunity to, have unions and also agitate for your welfare? Okay, it appears that our network, we are unable to have, this smooth session. But let's come back to our studio, Yusuf Baba. You heard all that he has to say. What's your, reactions to some of the things that he have raised?
Well, basically, Comrade we were saying things almost the same differently. The good thing is bringing the clarity within the Trade Union Act conversation and bringing the fact that there's a subsisting judgment with regards to the declaration or designation of the aviation workers as non-essential workers. And indeed, if that is the case, then we have a subsisting judgment that everybody should align to. They have not heard any superior judgment from the Court of Appeal or Supreme Court in that regard, and looking at it from the legal perspective. In discussions about legislation, this particular piece of legislation, recall I was wondering aloud, you know, hearing things about smuggling or boggled, and asking the question about if these discussions were not part of the public hearing or stakeholder engagement which is part of the process of legislation. And Comrade just told us, or before he went offline, that obviously, most likely, that was not the case. And if that is not the case, that brings an issue, you know, of managing the situation, if the case may, as the case may be.
As a stakeholder in
the industry,
in
yes.
the industry yourself,
yes.
The aviation workers say they have reached out to the lawmakers who say that they were not the ones who inserted that, what they call obnoxious section, into the bill. The minister responded yesterday saying he wasn't the one that inserted that provision. Now, who else could have done that?
Stella, we're Nigerians, and we've had cases. Remember the famous budget padding situation scenario. I was not part of this conversation, but we all know that there is no how a provision will just appear. A piece of legislation, as serious as it is, to be presented to the president of this country for accent, and all the critical players, and all the critical handlers, and all the critical facilitators and custodians of this very important piece of document that should be tagged high priority confidential, and then by magic it appeared. You know, it doesn't sound well, it doesn't sit well.
All right, so I understand that we now have Francis back, so let's get his final thoughts. Francis, in 1 minute, if you may tell us, I was trying to get clarity as to, why this is causing this kind of agitation. Is it because, you are not an essential service providers, that's the aviation workers, or is it because it denies you the opportunity to to vent your frustration and your concerns?
Yes, we have matured enough to understand the intention of the people that smuggled it into the bill before it is going to become an act. They want to guard the union. They don't want any contrary, want to continue to subjugate the workers to their whims and caprices. So that if we say anything that is not theirs, they even have the power to ban the union, to outlaw the union. So we will not wait for this to happen. And let me remind us, this law, a portion of it, these clauses have been in the Civil Aviation Act, I think since 2006. How have they been implemented? And not an enforceable law. It's not a law. It's not a law. Where they are even trying to borrow it from, that is the Trade Dispute Essential Services Act, was a product of the military. It used to be a decree since 1977. So what we got to now import it to get activities. Are we progressing or progressing? I don't know. We should. Even our lawmakers, they should learn.
All right.
They should learn not to continue making mockery of themselves.
All right. Thank you so much, Francis.
Try as much as possible to protect our common patrimony.
All right. Thank you so much, Francis, for the insight. Thank you for joining us on Daybreak. Unfortunately, we have to end the discussion at this point because of our time. Our guest has been the General Secretary, Air Transport Services Senior Staff Association of Nigeria, Comrade Francis Akinjole, who joins us virtually from Lagos, and also in the studio, strategist and policy analyst Yusuf Baba. Thank you so much for joining us on
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right, with that, we've come to the end of the show. In case you've missed, you can catch up across all our social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. and you can also watch us live on YouTube. My name is Ayuba Ilya. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.
Thank you for welcoming us into your homes this morning. Do well to join us same time, same station tomorrow. My name is Stella Yaji. For now, do have a pleasant day.